Many thanks, Joseph Olsen, for that elaborate background. Indeed, we have guests with us here in the studios, and they're all participants at the just concluded MC12. It's our pleasure to welcome the Honorable Minister of State, in charge of Industry, Trade and Investment, Ambassador Miriam Katagum. Honorable Minister, a pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, Nigeria.
Okay, and then we also have with us in the studio the Director General of the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations and also Nigeria's Chief Trade Negotiator, Ambassador Wto Fred Aga. Ambassador Aga, we're glad to have you.
Thank you. Good morning, and good morning, Nigeria.
And we're joining us on this conversation via Zoom from Geneva is Ambassador Adamu Abdul Hamid, Nigeria's ambassador to WTO. It's a pleasure to have you, Ambassador.
It looks like it's maybe his audio is muted, I believe. Right. Maybe our engineers will instruct him.
Exactly.
Yes, to unmute himself.
I'd have loved to start with him, you know.
Well, yes, but let's give the engineers the opportunity of clearing that up. So
okay. But yes, exactly. Honorable Minister, it's a pleasure once again to have you this morning. And let's begin with you. Give us the highlights, you know, of this MC12 conference of WTO. Of course, we've heard about the 10 points, you know, which our reporter raised concerning what has been reached, you know, at this very crucial conference. Lead us into that much more.
Yes, thank you very much. I think before I give you the highlights, first of all, let me thank Mr. President for giving me approval to lead this delegation. And the importance of this meeting, MC12, coming at this time when we have as Director General, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is the first female, first African, first Nigerian to hold that position. And given her antecedents in terms of her campaign promises to bring about reforms of the WTO. I think that is very important in terms of context. And secondly, the level of preparation that as a country we undertook. Because when we were going, prior to our departure, we had already triggered the enlarged national focal point, which is a body made up of several agencies that are involved in trade. And we had Nigeria's position prepared, even though on the ground when we got there we tried to negotiate. So that preparation helped us a lot in terms of our leadership role that we played and in terms of the outcomes. So as you said, there were 10 key outcomes, but I think for Nigeria I will select 6 that I think are of real priority. First of all, I look at the TRIPS waiver. And this TRIPS waiver has to do with waiving the rights of patents. So a country could decide very quickly that we want to start the production of vaccines. And you do not have to wait and get consent from the patent owner. You can quickly trigger the system, but you are obliged to report that, okay, we're going to use this aspect of the patent in order to produce vaccines. And this will help a lot of the developing countries, given the context of the onset of COVID-19 and what we saw happening with the vaccines. Secondly, I will take the issue of food security, because we discovered that a lot of the lack of free flow of products has created a kind of global, global situation whereby products are stuck in international markets, and then you have issues in countries either as a result of crisis, climate change, and so on. And with food security, there was a decision on enhancing the work of the World Food Program, allowing them to export food, unrestricted exportation, particularly to areas where there is hunger. You can see they've done a lot of work in the Horn of Africa, even here in Nigeria. Then you can look at e-commerce, the moratorium that says that we should not impose customs duties on e-transmissions until perhaps the next session when we look at this decision. And for us, this is very important. We have a very vibrant digital economy. We have a lot of young people with their startups and e-commerce, so it's going to be of great benefit to us. And I think this, the next one will be the fishery subsidies. A lot of illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing is happening off the coast of our countries. And this really has to stop. We have to put a check on this. And I think it's an area that will help our own artisanal fishermen, because for Nigeria, a lot of the fishing that we're doing is with the artisanal fishermen. And the last thing that I would take will be the WTO reforms. The DG came from a background of reforms, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. And we saw during the negotiations, one, she's already started reforms of the Secretariat. And then the modus operandi, because the WTO is a body that takes decisions by consensus. And we saw how we were stuck in the trenches, in the sense that a country could decide of particular interest in one of the negotiations over a word in a footnote, not even the main article. We were stuck for hours. And in fact, the meeting, as you know, was scheduled to start from 12th to 15th. The meeting did not end until the 17th, 5:30 a.m. on the 17th, trying to get all countries on board. So it's not like what you have in the UN system, whereby when you get stuck, you can go to a vote. With WTO, you have to negotiate. Every country has to agree. So how do you get this about? Trust, building trust. And we saw countries that hitherto did not have too much trust in each other, beginning to work together, agree on texts. And the mood at MC12 was that everybody wanted reform. Everybody wanted to leave Geneva with some concrete takeaway back to their countries. So I'll just take these 6, but the others are also very relevant, but I just took the 6 that I thought I can put a tag on in Nigeria. And then, of course, for us, yesterday, during our meeting, I'd given instructions that in the next 2 weeks, that enlarged national focal point must meet and cascade and discuss how Nigeria is going to implement the decisions of the MC12.
Okay, thank you very much, Honorable Minister of State MITI. That's Industry, Trade and Investment. We'll come back to it because of the conversation. Now let's bring in Nigeria's Chief Trade Negotiator. We have a broad spectrum audience for the Nigerian Television Authority, Africa's largest television network. How do you explain this to the Nigerian viewing audience right now? What this WTO trade talks mean, and then why we should pay attention to the resolutions?
Well, thank you. I think 2 things that we need to have at the back of our mind. Trade remains an important tool of development. There is no country in the world that has developed without trade. So an organization like the WTO that provides the framework of rules and agreements under which countries trade should be important to Nigeria and Nigerians. The challenge for us is understanding what these rules are, creating policies that dovetail into these rules, taking advantage of the flexibilities, because inherent in every WTO agreement is a commitment to do something. At the same time, that same agreement recognizes that you are not at, all members are not at the same level of development. So there are flexibilities for developing countries and less developed countries. There are also flexibilities as to when you run into trouble. So I can give you an example of the balance of payments. If you have a balance of payments problem, there's a provision that allows you to impose restrictions to correct that balance of payments. In the current environment, there are high trade and geopolitical tensions. Countries are almost at each other's throat. And that is the environment under which MC12 took place. The good lesson is that MC12 was not like Seattle, where everybody was rioting, no decision, no meetings. It was not like Cancun, where developing countries were blaming developed countries were blaming the developing countries. Here, members came together and agreed. What I would want Nigerians to know is that some of the very substantive issues which have been on the WTO agenda, particularly the reform of trade in agriculture, have not been addressed, particularly with respect to domestic support. Some of these countries are still holding. And what happened at MC12 is more like an agreement. Let's see what we can agree, and then we'll take up the other issues down the road. So the challenge again is the fact that every solution in the system becomes like a problem for the future. So when you say, for instance, in fishery subsidies, the issues of overcapacity, overfishing, which have been delayed till the next ministerial, would the members actually work? Will those who are unable to come together? So I think Nigerians need to know this. Nigerians need to begin to introduce trade and WTO issues in our universities, in our schools. We need even the youth to know. Business groups need to be involved. Think tanks need to spring up, because government officials alone cannot do this. Trade is not for government. Trade is for the private sector. And the private sector engagement with the government will improve the environment on how Nigeria benefits from its participation in the WTO and grows its economy out of poverty.
Okay, thank you. I hope we have clear audio now with Ambassador Adamu Abdul Hamid, Nigeria's ambassador to the WTO. Once again, let's welcome you formally to the program.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Nigeria.
Okay, good. I take it that you listened to the Honorable Minister of State and, of course, Ambassador Aga,
yes,
explaining what transpired, during the MC12. But I'm so concerned about Africa and in particular Nigeria with respect to world trade. Yes, we have our own daughter who is heading the place, but that does not mean that we will have it all. Listen, my understanding, high school understanding of economic, commerce as subjects, is that balance of trade is the difference between exports and the imports of commodities made to or by a country in a particular year. We have known that there's no proper balance of trade with respect to trading across the globe. African countries are oftentimes subchanged, if you like. So how has this MC12 conference taken care of Africa's position in terms of not being properly capacitated, to produce commodities and goods that they could export as a continent? For instance, of course, we import more than we export. Right. So is WTO conference, taking a look at this very critical, situation against the African continent?
Thank you very much, and I also want to join the Honorable Minister to thank the President for providing the political will to us to negotiate very, very well. And the Minister who led the delegation has really done a lot in terms of facilitating the active participation of the Nigerian delegation with a push for our position to be recognized during the ministerial conference. Based on your question, prior to the ministerial conference, here in Geneva, we have what we call African group. And African group will normally come together to discuss on each of the negotiating issues and also taking consideration of our national positions, and we harmonize positions. So that I think we have done, and that has helped the African countries in pushing forward their negotiating positions in the ministerial conference that took place. If you look at the decisions and the declarations that you've mentioned, about 10 of them, in each of these issues clearly reflected the interests of the African countries. Let's take, for instance, the issue of the e-commerce, that is the work program on e-commerce. It's been, for some times, we have been agitating for the reinvigoration of the e-commerce program, which of course the African countries all agreed to push forward on the discussions on the e-commerce work program, the view of the current situation globally. We are in a digital world now, and of course, no country should be left behind. So that has been taken care of. If you look at another issue on fishery subsidies, the fishery subsidy agreement has been on the table for the past 20 years until now that we have been able to make it possible. The interests of the African countries are reflected, even though we will continue to discuss, because there are still some areas of special and differential treatment which has to do with the de minimis, the transition period, and the nautical miles, which we will continue to discuss on the disciplines. So the other area is the issue of the food security. Globally, in fact, the African countries, due to COVID-19, are largely affected with the negative consequences of the COVID-19. So in that regard, in this decision of the food security decision, it was largely agreed that necessary actions must be taken to address the insecurity of food in our countries, which of course we are largely affected. So if you also look at the WTO response to pandemic, there are also some basic areas where the interests of Africa are largely captured in the sense of some trade restrictions that can harm some of our food security, and many other things, the trade facilitations and the rest. So eventually, I can vividly say that the interests of Africa are captured in all the issues that we negotiated in the ministerial conference. And the outcomes were very positive to us. And of course, it was all jubilating that for the first time, the ministerial conference with our sister in the head of affairs have been able to achieve tremendously in this ministerial conference. About 10 decisions, which for a very long time it has not happened. If you look at the history of all the past ministerial conferences, how many decisions were made in most of them? Some none at all. But this particular one, we got a lot. And of course, where Africa is happy is that all the issues have been captured based on the interests of the African members.
Ambassador Adamu Abu Hamid, thank you very much. Let me still stay with you and get the benefit of your presence in Geneva. You are Nigeria's ambassador to the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization. If you went through the literature on international economic law, international economic reforms, and indeed, the comments of some Nigerian players in the economy, the view was always expressed that we somehow walked into the WTO, which took over which was the organization that replaced GATT, that's the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, in 1995, without having a handle on some of the issues, which is why it was said that we're having some challenges with our trade relations and so on and so forth. But the happy comments that I've heard from the Honorable Minister of State, Nigeria's Chief Trade Negotiator, and yourself now in Geneva would seem to suggest that we are engaging a new gear in terms of, one, our understanding of WTO, and secondly, seeking to properly situate Nigeria's interest in WTO. Is that the case?
You are very correct. Let me tell you, before the coming on board of the current administration, which is the Director General of the World Trade Organization, everyone that has been following the happenings in the WTO will definitely confirm to you that things were really not going well because of the fact that there were a lot of mistrust among the members. There were a lot of challenges facing the WTO. In fact, most countries have started losing hope because of the challenges facing the multilateral trading system, particularly the WTO. So with the coming of the DG, current DG, in fact, during the campaign, she already promised members that she was coming as a reformist to ensure that the image and the integrity of the World Trade Organization is restored. And as soon as she took over, she started with that zeal. And she was able to mobilize all the members to come back to the table and to continue the negotiations. With that, Nigeria's image, in view of the fact that she is the leader in the World Trade Organization Secretariat, is really very popular. Now, we that are here representing Nigeria in participating in all the negotiations, and with the support of our ministers and stakeholders back home, we are able to liaise with the office of the DG and of course the chairs of all the negotiating groups to push our positions, and our positions are being recognized. So the leadership role played by Nigeria at the moment in the World Trade Organization is really recognized internationally. So we are really making much effort to ensure that more benefit goes to Nigeria. I can even confirm to you that after the visit of the DG, thanks visit to the president at that time by the DG, by the time she returned, we put all the reports together of our coalition of interest from Nigeria, and we started working seriously. I can tell you that a lot of things from that period till now have been realized in terms of the support to the SMEs, in terms of the support to the trade standards development. Also, there are many things that we are working, technical assistance program, and so on. So, really, as you said, the interest of Nigeria is really being recognized now in the WTO. And globally, they are appreciating the effort and support of Nigeria in contribution to the development of the multilateral trading system at the moment.
Thank you, Ambassador Demo Abdul Hamid, Nigeria's ambassador to WTO. Honorable Minister, Nigeria has been engaged in previous WTO meetings, even before it became it metamorphosed into the WTO. And the question would have been, Nigeria is said to have no international product. Analysts have examined exports and they realized the fact that apart from food items or commodities, that goes to few countries across the globe, because some reject products coming from Nigeria and all that. We don't seem to have an international product we can hold on to say, look, we are trading internationally and this is one of our products. All right, and we have also signed certain agreements in the past, and one have wondered whether those agreements have been implemented. If yes, how have those agreements benefited Nigeria, apart from the current one that you have just, has been established, Nigeria being interested in 6 points, which you raised earlier on? Would you say that Nigeria has been religiously implementing agreements by the WTO in the past. What is your view about this, and how do you now intend to ensure that whatever is agreed at that level will be implemented in Nigeria and will be beneficial to our trading system?
Thank you very much. First of all, for me as a minister, I believe in value for money. When we came on board, I discovered we pay contributions to the WTO to the tune of about 530,000 Swiss francs, which is almost equivalent to 530,000 US dollars. So the question is, what are we getting out of the WTO, which was what informed our engagement in terms of preparations, reorganizing the National Office for Trade Negotiations, even upgrading our office in WTO with the ambassador. So having said that, this engagement for us indicates the level of seriousness of the administration, because His Excellency the President has come with an agenda of economic transformation and improving the lives of people. And trade is one of the areas. The main purpose of trade is to improve the lives of the people. When you trade, your economy grows, then you're able to improve the lives of the people. So there are various agreements, as you said, but given the context of WTO prior to the recent arrival of the DG, we met, there's so many agreements, as has been mentioned. You have this agreement on that's been negotiated for 20 years, an agreement on fisheries. 20 years is a lifetime. Ambassadors would have come to Geneva and gone back, and it's not just Nigeria, all the countries. So that sense of urgency. Secondly, you find that if you have agreements that you're not implementing, things like COVID come that nobody planned for, and then it completely upsets the whole system. So if I mention COVID now, you look at, as I said, what happened with the vaccines. By now, we should also be planning. How are we going to start producing these vaccines in the country? Which is why I said in 2 weeks, that committee needs to sit down, because the committee has as members from all aspects of the trade, MDAs and so on and so forth. Then you said something about Nigeria not having a product, an international product. I do not quite agree with that, because one of the areas of thrust for this administration is agriculture. And a lot of products are coming up. We had as a case study or an example of a lady during the MC12 that was showcased. She was showcased amongst 4 other MSMEs that's producing shea butter from Shaki or somewhere in Oyo State with support from the IFC. And she told why she was selected is, at a point she was only doing 2,000 tons of shea butter per annum. Now she's doing 40,000 tons and looking for a market where to send this into. There are so many products that are coming up. These ones, I would say, initiatives of the ministry and also initiatives of the private sector. Our sesame seed, our cocoa, our palm oil, things are coming up. And we have the commodities associations.
And
yes.
I'm not cutting you short. I'm just, I want to continue from the I mentioned that we, apart from commodities that we're talking about now,
I get that.
We'll have to talk about international.
No, but apart
for instance, yes, madam, the phones that we use,
yes,
is an international product.
Yes.
These food items we're talking about, or commodities, not many countries will want to have that. Right, we cannot sell in all countries. But phone, for instance, sells in every country across the globe. That's what I meant by having an international product.
Yeah, but now you have our digital space. You have our young people that have startups in the fintech area, where you have maybe 5 or 6 Nigerian companies that are now unicorns. So you need to look at those areas of services. You need to look at the areas of the creative industries where we're making a lot of strides. you know, be it fashion, be it IT, and so on and so forth. So we have all these emerging products, if I may call them, and these products are doing very well. And even within the business forum of Chogom, we discovered a lot of Nigerians that came to showcase what it is they're doing, what it is that they're selling to the international community.
Honourable Minister, thanks. We'll get it pressed for time, so I'll reserve one of my questions for you when we go around the other guests. Ambassador Aga, the Chief Trade Negotiator for Nigeria. A lingering concern for observers of Nigeria's economy is how we can continue to avoid being a dumping ground for all kinds of products from all corners of the world. Is this part of what we should expect now as an outcome of these WTO talks and agreements?
Well, thank you. The reality of every country, no two economies are the same. Each economy has its peculiarities. The trust of policymakers is to identify what works for you. And what may work for Nigeria may not work for another country. Or what works for other countries may not work for Nigeria at all. Sometimes for cultural reasons, for location, and all kinds of things. When you trade, you must not see it as a zero-sum game. Trade is mutually beneficial. So the challenge for Nigeria, which is what I have been pushing for, is not about importing or not importing. It's about what do you import. And you can answer this question by looking at your framework of rules. Very often you hear people talk about free trade, and free trade is harming us. There's nothing like free trade anywhere in the world. It's the rules. And when you look at Nigeria trade rules, the trade sector in Nigeria is the least regulated. So if you don't regulate, you get all kinds of things coming in. If you go to America, which we say is a champion of the market economy, there are certain things you can't even sell. You sell to somebody that the government considers an enemy, is treated as treason, and you go to prison. So what we are trying to do now, based on the trade policy action plan that the government approved in March this year, is to build the basic trade support infrastructure and institutions. Unfortunately, where we are now, sometimes there are misgivings because there are things that others are doing. There are encroachments. But the first thing we are trying to do, which I think we have the draft bills now back from Federal Ministry of Justice, is what you call an investigating authority. All over the world, government protects producers. And government protects producers, allowing them to file complaints, whether it is on the basis of anti-dumping, because a company abroad is underselling in a market to take advantage, or whether it's simply in terms of an import surge, safeguards. So like we are doing AFCFTA. What happens if we liberalize under the AFCFTA and there is a surge in imports? We have a right to protect the economy, but we have to follow certain steps, certain rules. So we need to have a law on safeguards. There could also be a situation where a government is subsidizing a particular sector to enable it sell abroad. We need to have something on subsidies so we can countervail those kinds of imports that we get. So at the end of the day, we need to be clear. Dumping per se is not the dumping that we see in Nigeria. The dumping that we see in Nigeria is criminal, or is a malfeasance, where people are bringing in fake, counterfeited products. That's not for trade. That's for the customs, for SON and the other regulatory authorities to handle. But for trade, you need a platform where the business community will file complaints, you will investigate, you put duties. In doing this, you have to recognize that apart from the producer, you need to protect the consumer.
All right, Ambassador. I'm not quite sure. We're running short of time, right? So I'd like to get to Geneva before we round up.
Let me just round this up.
Just a few seconds.
Just because sometimes when you focus too much on the producer, you harm the consumer. When you harm the consumer, you harm the retailer or those who are in the distributive chain, and you disrupt the economy. One that will higher prices. So these are the kinds of things we need to
Okay, I think when my colleague talked about dumping, I'm not sure he meant just fake products. There are ones that are not fake products. If you go to Lagos in some area, you see Chinese, trading along the road, selling a little cracker or bend down select and what have you. Right? You can't do that in China, for instance. So when we talk about these agreements that we reached at WTO level, in some countries, like Nigeria, for instance, people bring in a lot of things. And one talks about you talked about regulation, which perhaps is lacking, in this direction, and that's the reason why my colleague said look, dumping, and we see it, in many products, across Nigeria. Ambassador Adamu Abdul Hamid, what is your take on this issue of dumping, in Nigeria? Because I know that in Switzerland, you cannot just sell anything they want to sell. Because, whenever you agree on WTO, if the country says, look, don't import this to our country, it doesn't come in. Even your product's brand, in some cases, like in America, if you don't produce an American specification, they're not going to buy.
For instance, that the U.S. and some of the other bigger economies have wars over steel imports or steel exports.
Exactly. So let's hear from you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I quite agree with the explanation by Ambassador Aga. Only to add that I think if I can understand what you are talking about the Chinese, in our market, directly selling as items. I think that has to do with what we call distributive trade. And distributive trade has its own policy, which of course will limit the kind of foreign nationals on what they should embark on at the national level. So, and I think that is what needs to be addressed. The issue of dumping, as you rightly mentioned, is that when we talk of dumping in trade, we mean that selling something at a lower price compared to what is in the foreign market. So, and of course, that has to be thoroughly investigated to establish that the foreign goods being sold at the national level, the price of it is far less than what is in the foreign market before it is established, and that has its own channel of investigation. There has to be that anti-dumping authority. There has to be complaint, by probably the competitors in the domestic market, that the import surge of social products into the country is affecting theirs, and of course with a kind of complaint with some certain observation, and the authority will have to carry out the investigation of to the foreign market to establish what is the price being produced there, calculating with the transportation and so on, then to be able to establish that dumping established. Now, with the
Ambassador Abdul Hamid, I'm sorry, we have to jump in again one more time because we have less than a minute or round about that to wrap up this program. Honorable Minister of State, you listed in your opinion 6 core areas that the 2022 agreements impact on Nigeria. Tell us something. How will this have policy implications for us? How do we follow through with a critical element in our public policy space, namely implementation?
Thank you very much. I think, first of all, as I mentioned, we're triggering that system that helped us to create or establish Nigeria's position. For example, if you look at the TRIPS waiver on vaccine production, it means immediately our pharmaceutical industry and the Ministry of Health need to trigger a system whereby those 2 ways, those pharmaceutical companies that are interested in going into vaccine production or government established vaccine previous vaccine producing institutions
Yes.
could be assisted to quickly take advantage of this waiver. It's a waiver that's in place for some time. It's not a waiver that will be there forever. So we need to trigger that immediately. Secondly, when we look at the issue of the moratorium on e-commerce, it's probably customs to take note that these e-transmissions, there's a moratorium in place. And wherever there is a moratorium or space, breathing space given, countries quickly take advantage of this kind of space. Already, I could give the example of Rwanda that's already putting in place, doing a groundbreaking ceremony for vaccine production. But if you're doing vaccine production, remember you also have to do the campaign on enlightenment on vaccine hesitancy, because you do not want to produce the vaccines and your people are not this thing. And then, of course, in terms of the fish subsidies, agencies like the NIOMA, Institute of Oceanography and Marine Research, which is in Lagos, which has to do with fisheries, needs to key in to see in what areas can they help the country or our fishermen. Yes.
All right, Honorable Minister,
Yes.
at this point, we'd like to, appreciate your presence here this morning and your contribution to the conversation. All right, Honorable Minister of State, Industry, Trade and Investment, Miriam Katagun, thank you again for being here. And Ambassador Fred Aga, Nigeria's Chief Negotiator, Trade Negotiator, we thank you for being here. And of course, Ambassador Adamu Abdul Hamid, Nigeria's Ambassador to WTO. It's been a pleasure sharing your views on Good Morning Nigeria today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And that's it for us on Good Morning Nigeria today. Deep thanks for tuning in. Join us tomorrow same time, 7 in the morning. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kyrian Umayo. You have a wonderful day.